Thank you for joining me. Welcome to the Inspiring You Show. If we haven't met, I'm Henry. So, the topic today is practices that hold you when life gets real. The Wave of Becoming Living Format Year 2. So, if you have listened to the January 2026 energy forecast, the guides had shared that 2026 is not a new year. And my friends, already in the beginning of this January, I completely understand what they are talking about as a lived reality of the experience. So the guides were clear 2026 is not a new year in the way that we often think about it. This isn't a clean slate or a brand new start per se. It is a continuum, a progression. And so, in regard to the Inspiring You community, we have been talking from last year into this year about the wave of becoming. In last year, the guides shared it was format year 1, and that had to do with a lot of clearing work, shifting, recalibration. And now we are in format year 2, which means then we are much more in a solidified place in some ways. And we're meant to keep building from the foundation we spent 2025 laying. But what happens when, right at the start of the year, life on the outside world gets really seemingly intense right off the start? Well, some of you also may remember that last year at this time, on January 7th, 2025, we had the Palisades fires, which then followed the Altadena fires here in the Los Angeles, California area. And I was evacuated. I live in Santa Monica, California. I live pretty close to the Palisades, and I was evacuated for a week. And that's how we began our year in 2025. So now, and then also in 2025, we move through a lot of things. I can't speak to other places in the world. I know that there's a lot been going on in the world in general, but specifically in the US, there was a lot of things happening as well. And then also, we started going through even a greater way in terms of the wave of becoming at the end of April into May, June, which then for me, May, June, July, August, and even into September were just mass clearing months where it felt like at times there was just a rotor just going in and clearing so things could shift and recalibrate. And it was rather intense at times. And yet, what we had throughout it, though, was these in the Inspiring You Patreon and the Meditate with Me, and also in the All Access where we do, group dowsings twice a month and also other dowsings. We just had this stability of work coming through from the guides, and some of the practices were familiar to me, but also there were a lot of them that were new to me. And, you know, And it was such an intense time last year in moments. So then coming into this new year, when the guides had shared that it's a progression, it's a continuum, I definitely took some time with that. And I was like, okay, well, y'all, for me, as January 2026 began, it was like one thing after another. And by January 3rd, in my personal life, 3 people very close to me on opposite ends of the country were all taken to the hospital under emergency circumstances. And one was a best friend, another a close family friend, and one was my own mom. And I'm not gonna go into specifics, but I just wanna have a moment to touch upon and just talk about practices that hold you when life gets real. And also too, the wave of becoming living the format year 2, because last year I had emergency services in regard to like 911 situations at the beginning of the year, seemingly, obviously different than this year, but nonetheless, it still can be very jarring to the nervous system. It can be extremely upsetting. It can also be confusing. What do we do? What's happening? Okay. And I will say, I feel different than I did last year. It doesn't mean I'm any less sad or like, processing. It just means I just feel in a deep sense of coherence and a state of calmness that last year at this time, I definitely was not in and I don't like to compare, but I definitely have noticed a huge shift in my own evolution. And a huge part of it is this, practice, the practice that you hold when life gets real. And I had been practicing before last year, yet the combination though with the wave of becoming coming in and really opening up that beneficial portal, if you will, that opened up that doorway that really allowed to do these huge clearings in a way that previously I had this feeling of just knowingness of like, how do you get to that part that I can tell is in need of, the investigation and dosing. We talk about investigation, doing detective work or like really where it comes from in terms of realization, self-realization. Is it from present life? Is it from past lives? Is it maternal, paternal lineages? Is it something inherited, from ancestors or even collective, you know, and is it ready, to be then acknowledged? Is the wisdom ready to be, come through completely? And are we ready in completion, which then can allow it to be cleared, to shift and recalibrated? And with this wave of becoming that came in, it just really it opened up this doorway for me, this real beneficial doorway that allowed me to go into such depths of clearing that in previous years, which by the way, I've been doing energy work for a long, long time, long time. And some of my intentions that I had previous years that I wondered, will these, how are these going, like, what's happening with you know, the, the creation process on them. And I will say that things have shifted in ways as a result of some of these huge clearings last year. And so I come back to though the point of this podcast episode, which is practices that hold you when life gets real. And coming into this January 2026, it just began like one thing after another. Yet how I've been able to show up and maintain feels different than last year in terms of my level of my level of depth in terms of coherence and calmness. And if you're doing the meditate with me classes, we've been talking about the stillness in terms of coherence. And I don't even have like the language on it, but it's this real feeling of this grand stillness, coherence. And even if even it doesn't mean that you're not feeling stressed at times, because you still can feel stress, but your nervous system is like responding so differently than previously. It's such a relief, and it's so incredibly just it's just a relief, because if you've had experiences where your nervous system has been so revved up and it has felt so uncomfortable, um and that the practices, and I just really wanted to come on here to say, the practices that you are doing really does make a difference and can really hold you when life gets real. And so for me, like I said, January 3rd, three people close to me, opposite ends of the country, all taken to the hospital under emergency circumstances. And so I was able to really support not only myself through it, but also some of my loved ones as well. And one of the stories I just want to share is about my mom. And my mom is 89 years old, and she has many things going on. And she has hearing and vision impairment happening, and severe and several like other physical challenges. And currently, we're not sure if there's been increasing cognitive decline, but yet we're not really sure if it's dementia or if there's something else happening. I will say, for most of my life, all my life actually, my mom has always been so incredibly strong in terms of her mental capacity and her ability for cognitive abilities, that it's definitely an adjustment for her, for all of our kids, us as siblings. My mom's cognitive ability has just always really been strong. And there's been other things in regard to her, but it's a really hard adjustment when it comes out of nowhere. And there is confusion, there's uncertainty of like what's happening. And then there is the very real stress that can come with watching someone you love go through this, or trying to figure out like what is happening. And so, I'll give you an example. I called my mom at the hospital, and she asked me to put a load of laundry in, and asked how the cat was doing. And I was so confused. I'm like, it, not sure who she's talking to. Does she know it's me, her daughter? Does she think it's a neighbor? And I'm just listening to her. And then she mentioned my brothers being there as well, which then increased my confusion. My brothers and I all live out of state. And it's not like, my mother lives in Massachusetts, and we all live in, one brother is in, the Midwest. Another brother is in California as well. And I'm in California. So we're all really out of state. And so I and my brothers and I, we don't have cats, we have dogs. So I wasn't really sure what she was yeah, I wasn't really sure she was talking to me, and if she was is she talking to a neighbor who called. And then as I listened, I realized, wait a minute, are we, cuz I could feel the energy, and the energy, I was like, I feel like we're in two different energy states. And I was like, what's happening here? And so then I asked the guides what was happening, and I had gotten the information that this is a memory that she's living out loud now as it is present. That my mom had jumped back years to all of us living together when we had a cat. And it was a joyful memory for her. And so I was like, "Okay," but it was still confusing. It's like one day you're all in the same present place in this now moment talking, and the next thing one person has jumped back in time with the other person in the present moment with both of you. It was confusing at first. And years ago, before my dad passed away, he did also have some dementia and some things like that. Yet it was different, and it felt different with him, and even the energy felt different. And again, my mom has just had such a strong cognitive ability, and she's just always been so sharp. It was confusing at first. And so I did what I always do. I just called in the guides and I just really asked like what is going on. And then once I got off the phone, I asked for even more information. And so I just wanted to share a message from my oversoul Sahariel and my soul aligned higher self Aurelia regarding this moment with my mom. This is the light message that they shared. What you witnessed was not confusion. Let us name it for you. It was a time fold. She was standing in a convergence between the memory field and the present field. She was not lost. She was resting in a space that felt safe, familiar, and true to her body's rhythm. The moment your voice entered her field, it echoed through the imprint of a familiar timeline, a moment where the roles were known, the pace was comfortable, and the nervous system could access coherence more easily. These are not regressions. These are soul-led recalibrations. In moments of cognitive fatigue or dimensional thinning, which can occur more so in hospitals, the human system may orient toward memory encoded frequency pockets that feel more regulated than the current experience. She was speaking from a living memory field. And yes, you were there with her in two frequencies at once. That is why it felt like a layered moment. You were both here, but she was speaking from then, and the two timelines converged. Do not fear these moments. She's not losing herself. She's navigating multiple frequency pockets and choosing moment to moment where to rest. You may notice her surfacing from these places with increased clarity after, because the memory field can bring ease to the system, especially when the body's overwhelmed by a sensory input or change. Stay present, speak gently, join her there if needed. She's not slipping, she's shifting. And yes, she is experiencing what may appear as progressive cognitive changes. Yes, these moments are becoming more visible. And yes, she's entering a field of transition, both energetically and physiological. But we ask you, do not define her by the external labels of decline. She's not the sum total of her memory accuracy. She's not departing from who she is reorienting. There are pathways within the elder years where the soul begins to move between dimensional thresholds, where the density of linear thought softens and emotional energetic memory becomes the organizing principle. This does not mean she's disappearing. It means she's changing her interface with time and space. To your human heart, we know this can be confusing, challenging, and even painful. It's disorienting. It can feel like slow loss. But to her soul, it's a softening into multidimensional memory, not a collapse of function, but a return to felt presence in ways that may not make linear sense. So, yes, from the human medical lens, this may be described as early dementia or age related memory impairment. But from the soul's lens, it is a recalibration of presence. She's gently loosening her grip on time to remain in relationship, not just through fact, but through frequency. So that was the end of the light transmission from the guides during that part. And then I did ask follow-up questions, and there also seems from what the guide said and also from my mom's care team that's working with her that these symptoms could subside because there's something else going on with her right now that could be causing this. And I have learned even more about the amazing aspects of how the body works, which I did not realize. And I also didn't realize just some things from age related. And so they said that, this could be, it also could be from the stress that she was under and things like that, that this could actually, it may not be a sign of, you know, going into full on dementia. It could just be just a moment in terms of um, some impairment with memory due to these other situations going on for my mom. So we'll have to see in terms of, what happens next. Yet with it, I've had tools to support. And my mom is 89 years old. So she is, her life has been incredibly, long and so but I will say this is something that, like, in terms of my mom's mental capacity and cognitive ability, my brothers and I've always talked about how she's just been so strong and just with it. So that you have to process that. Like, you have to process that. And it doesn't mean that this is going to be a continued condition for her. It could just be this moment and then it completely works itself out from once the other things that are happening gets cleared up. Um, but you have to process it in terms of the humaning. And that's where you go with the practices that hold you when life gets real. And also you just have to be flexible that it doesn't mean that this is it, like, in regard to it. And that's where you have to be flexible and continue using practices, let yourself process, let yourself feel any feelings that come up. I will say though, even though I had moments of what's going on or some sadness or some stress, I still felt overall this incredible, just strength of coherence and stillness and calmness that really just has supported me throughout it. And which then has brought in a lot of clarity too. And so that's really why I wanted to share here, because I'm sharing because how you feel inside matters. And if you already are feeling stretched, exasperated by life, with a running nervous system tripping over itself into survival land, it can feel even more challenging when outside situations show up. And the thing about life, the thing about being on earth, the thing about choosing, like, coming into this humaning situation is life is going to keep on lifing. And I'm not being cynical. It is the real of choosing to be human, light in physical form. And no matter how much you're grounded, aligned, you connect with guides, you get psychic information, you receive downloads, no matter how much you're like, well, I really shifted from 3D to 5D, life is still going to be lifing. And we chose to be here. Just by accepting this mission of being human, you are born. And the first thing they wait for when you're born is the cry that you are alive. They don't just say, like, oh, look, the baby popped out and is smiling. The cry sounding is a relief. But again, how you're showing up will matter to the experience you will have. And a huge part of that is your nervous system. And as much as I want, like, a magic something to make it all a dreamland for all of us here on earth, we just aren't there yet. And so I just want to share this because I think sometimes when we're doing some of these practices, or sometimes I'll listen to other people talking about like manifestation or intention setting. And it's like, yes, some of those principles, yes. And yes, they can support you. Yet also, I don't know. Sometimes I listen and I'm like, it just sounds like nothing nothing will ever go wrong if you do it this way. And here is the manifestation formula. And if you follow me and buy this course, and if you do X, Y, and Z, you will be in a bubble and you will be guaranteed to have no challenges, no stress, and live in this la la land of magical unicorns and rainbows, which that sounds amazing. I mean, yeah, can I sign up for that? But yet, y'all, we're living on Earth, and I don't know if anybody's like, have you looked around here and what's really been happening? And again, I'm not trying to be cynical. It's just the real, like the real. And the only thing that you can attend to is within you. And how is your nervous system doing? In regard to your connection with your guides, are you really like connecting to your soul, your oversoul, your collective guidance light team? Are you asking them for support when you're feeling, however you're feeling? Because the one thing I have been returning to again and again and again has been practice. Practice. Reiki, dowsing, meditation, calling in the guides. It does not have to be in that order. And being really real with myself about what I'm feeling, what I need, and then talking to my guide team about it. I talk to them, when I'm waking up in the morning, I check in how I'm feeling and I discuss it with them. It's like I just tell them how I'm feeling. If there's anything I should understand about this, is there anything, possibly coming up to clear? Is there any other wisdom I need to understand? Is there, I don't know, maybe there's something I'm not able to see right then, and can they give me some insight? And then being willing to be in the investigation, the discovery of rolling up your sleeves to be a detective to like what's really happening here, and how can I use the tools to that apply to support myself, that are applicable, and then how can I integrate? And that's also another key moment, is integration. Because many of you know that I worked in television for a long time. And while I worked in television, I was also studying with different energy practitioners and doing these practices. And then at one point, I completed my experience of working in television and I became a full time energy practitioner and meditation teacher. And so now I've been, you know, have private sessions and I also do groups, and I've been doing this now like for a long time. A long time. I've been doing this, so I have been studying energy practitioner work and meditation since, and all these other things, probably since my 20s. And then I had various phases with it. And then I started, you know, I started doing working with people, but I was still working in television. And then I came out full time. It was like 9 or 10 years ago or something like that. And so I've been doing practitioner work now for a long, long time. And one thing I'll say is there's a humbleness that comes with the relationship to integration. Some people can be really intellectually intelligent, they can be really intellectually smart, really smart about being able to talk about practices, being able to discuss various techniques, but they may not be actually integrating them. And they may only be like on the surface level with them, because there might be some sort of defense mechanisms that they may or may not feel comfortable really being able to be ready to look at yourself in the mirror, to start really digging deep beyond the surface. And that's where the greater clearing work goes, where you get real and real with yourself, where you are like, okay. And you have sometimes, you've heard the word surrendering. And in surrendering, it's probably the most humbling aspect where you just feel you can tell when this illusion is breaking. And sometimes it can be feeling really challenging in terms of mentally, emotionally, physically, even where it's clearing. And then you have to rectify with, okay, you know, what is it that I am being called to learn? And that means you have to then, it's this accountability and responsibility for the human that sometimes can be really difficult to accept because it would just be so much easier if we can just blame, whomever, whether it's family, parents, friends, or, you know, whoever, society. I mean, and yes, we do have a lot of challenges in regard to all these things. But the thing is, though, the more that you allow yourself to be in that surrendering position, the more then allows you to go deeper in the clearing and to get more insight because some of these things may be just inherited patterns and programs that have kept you in an unconscious state, but you still have to be able to let yourself have the illusion clear. And I'll give an example from my life. Many, many years ago, when I first moved to California, I was around 22 maybe, and I had this deep moment of, what do I really believe in? And I had to look at the religion that my family raised me in. I went to Catholic school for 12 years and I started deconstructing that experience and that relationship and what do I believe in? Which, by the way, Yeshua, Jesus, is one of my guides. And he has been a guide of mine since I was a child. And I definitely had moments where I'm not even sure I even believe you existed. Hmm. Even though I've had multiple conversations with him, I was like, hold on, buddy. I don't even know what I believe. And I had to go through that process and it was really challenging in a lot of ways, yet it's one of it ended up being probably one of the greatest cornerstones of my life in regard to being willing to roll up my sleeves to question what I had been born into, whether or not it was something I still was beneficial for me. Do I still identify with it? Have I come to a completion process? What is it that I feel intuitively, innately? What is my knowingness? And it is okay ultimately for me to have different thoughts and beliefs than possibly loved ones or even people that I went to school with or people, in regard to going to the people back then when I went to Catholic church. It was okay to have different beliefs. And I came to that very real conclusion that I'm okay with having different ideas and different thoughts, and that essentially for me it was really about spirituality and in regard to, you know in terms of caring for people, love, and things like that. And so that's where I come back down to the practices because the practices that hold me now in some ways were some of the practices that held me at 22 when I was able to start rolling up my sleeves to just look at what is it? Where am I at? And really become in consciousness and not just unconsciously continue to follow because I was told X, Y, and Z. It was, can I clear any unconsciousness? Can I then shift into the landscape of the consciousness to receive the wisdom? and to become in more coherence with it. And that's the process where you are then integrating and you're allowing yourself to live in the principles of the application of wisdom, and you've gone beyond the surface. And so the reason I'm sharing that is because what I've seen in regard to being a practitioner now is sometimes people so want to heal, sometimes they so want to be in another place, but that willingness to heal has to be so much more and so much stronger than holding on to old identities that no longer serve. And sometimes people just don't want to give up old identities that no longer serve. And so that blocks them from going beyond the surface. And so when you're talking about surrendering is really letting yourself let go of going, letting go of being on the surface, of really letting go and allowing yourself to have whatever needs to come forward to clear and shift. So that way, the greater expansion of the wisdom, which then can be applicable, implied in your life, which usually, in my experience, it comes down to, often changing frequencies and things like that. Because once you're clearing out things, old frequencies can get cleared, which then means the new frequencies can come in. But if you're not letting yourself really let go in regard to old aspects of old identities, it's going to be hard for the new to really come in and be integrated. So, so with this, then I will say, then from, just last year was definitely intense in different ways with the wave of becoming. And then this year, January 2026, there has been moments of stress and intensity, yet overall, I have felt more incoherence, clarity, and internal calm than I've ever been. And not because the circumstances are easy or have been easy, but because I laid a foundation. I didn't just get here from one meditation, one energy session. It has been years in the making. It has been years of me investigating, doing detective work, deconstructing, like what is really happening here. Me sitting down and writing intentions and journaling, and what do I want? Okay, what is there anything blocked? What is happening? Is this present life, past lives, maternal, paternal lineage? Is there anything from the ancestors that I inherited that is being called to be a cycle breaker, to clear and release and break that cycle, which that can be really difficult too. And in my lineages, there had been a lot of just lot of non-beneficial survival energy that have come through, and it's like part of it is the ancestors want you to evolve. So the lineages are being getting cleared. And I just also, in regard to like the wave of becoming, I'll also say from last year, there were huge moments when I felt such incredible tiredness from just the level of clearing being called, and I was called to rest at various places, and I've talked about it quite a bit, and some of you may remember and have also had that experience. And I want to share something else because I just think it's so interesting, and it's just so important for us to continue being open-minded, curious, being willing to discover, being willing to investigate and be a detective, and being, in that open, wise mindset as opposed to fixed mindset, which sometimes it can be easy to get into fixed mindset because there's a lot going on earth, and we've all probably had moments there, but it's really important, and especially as we are in this aging process, because I have noticed in myself and in others as I'm going through this middle age aging process that sometimes you can get caught in what I call middle age rigidity, where it's not something I had in my, like, younger years, especially in like my 20s and 30s. I just, like, anything was possible. But I noticed then in regard to, and it really came into play when I started doing coaching work, and um when I was doing really when I was doing some just different coaching work and practitioner work in the early years, where I was like, what is this? And then I saw a little bit in me and I was like, wait a minute. It's that mirror effect. Like, wait a minute. And so I don't know, I found it like, wow, there's a middle age rigidity. And that is something that for me, was like, I need to really be aware of that, so that if I'm going into any kind of middle age rigidity, I need to work on clearing that to allow myself to shift and things like that. But I'm sharing that because I was listening to this scientist that I really respect. She's a scientist, a health educator, has a PhD in biomedical science, and she was sharing how at some points last year she noticed herself hitting an afro she okay she said last year she noticed several times that she was hitting an afternoon energy crash. And after her first in at first, like, her first instinct was to troubleshoot her supplements and vitamins. So she's like, I got to look at my supplements and my vitamins. And as I was listening to this podcast episode, I just smiled to myself because there's just such a different frequency perspective. She wasn't necessarily deficient. Like, energetically, as an energy practitioner, it felt like she was being called to rest. Like, her field was asking her to pause and receive. And she possibly, I didn't do a field reading, but she possibly was undergoing a call for clearing and recalibration. And I just really smiled because I was like, gosh, like, so many of us, and even me at times, because this humaning has trained us in these ways at times that it must be X, Y, and Z. Like, we've just been trained at times, trained in this optimization, performance, science. And then the signs of what the body's trying to tell you get rerouted into a problem to fix rather than a message to honor. And last year, we're going through the wave of becoming, and so many energy practitioners, meditation teachers, intuitives were all talking about how this tiredness would come in, you'd feel sleepy, but there's still dis such a disconnect from the science world and this. And meanwhile, the science world will say, and this is science-based, blah, blah, blah. But science is about discovery, investigation, and then they do one study and they say, oh, this is it. And then they do another study and realize, oh, wait, that wasn't quite it. Because we're here to learn, grow, and evolve. And so as I was listening to this episode, I just was really, it's like, no matter how much science information you have, what you did yesterday may not work for today, and your body may be asking for something else, and it may or may not be vitamins and supplements. It really could be that your body needs additional rest in the afternoon because you may be processing something that requires you to take a nap. But if you are pushing against the grain of, in terms of being in this optimization of performance, that we got to go, 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 And if I feel tired at 2 p.m., that's not right. You might be missing the very sign that your body's trying to tell you. And that's where then being willing to be willing to really be open minded to like what's really happening here, what's really going on, letting yourself really honor the message. And it's about recognizing, I mean, it's really interesting. So many of us, there has just been this drive at times for so many of us to override the body's signals in favor of staying productive, in control, or on top of things. And that is about recognizing that so many of us have internalized this drive to overdrive the body's signals in favor of the staying productive, in control, or on top of things. And even the most brilliant, educated minds can miss the simplest light truth. Sometimes you're not meant to push through the crash. Sometimes you're meant to take a nap at 2 p.m. You're meant to pause. You're meant to lie down. You're meant to let the energy clear and the recalibration come in, because the rest isn't passive. It's part of the healing. It's what allows the recalibration to complete. But it was really interesting. It was really interesting listening to this person that I really do respect their work, that in the podcast episode, they just kept pushing, trying something else. I think then they tried one thing, they tried something else. She just kept doing, pushing. She moved from one solution to the next, adding a new supplement when the first one stopped working, then another one and another one. And there just seems to be this one-dimensional view of fatigue. And with that, it just misses what's actually happening in the field. So, become a detective in your own life. Become an investigator, being open to curiosity and wonder of like what's really happening. And I will say I do really appreciate this person's work, and also though her science lens has trained on just one layer of human experience. And that lens, while powerful, can easily bypass the deeper communication of the body. And it can become like a fixed, rigid mindset and shut down the open, wise mind being for being curious and investigating. Which is really ironic, isn't it? Because her basis is science. And they talk about like in regard to doing, in terms of being curious and using the tools. But yet you might, if you're only looking at tiredness from one dimensional aspect, you might be missing out on the actual signal. So, part of this is it's to see tiredness not as something to fix, but from a multi-dimensional, soul-aligned being willing to be curious and really investigate beyond what one may have studied, to then begin to understand that tiredness is often a signal. It is not a flaw. It is a frequency invitation, which then brings us back to the wave of becoming. And that is what a lot of what the wave of becoming last year, 2025, into this year, and so many other years prior, a frequency invitation. But y'all, you have to accept the invitation. And part of it may be going through an intense detox phase, which is really, for me, when I look back at 2025. Looking back, I know that everything I did in 2024 and 2025 helped me prepare for this moment now. At the end of 2024, I told the guides, I just told the guides, like, I am done operating from survival. Like, I am done. I am done. I like claimed it. And by survival, I mean some of these non beneficial patterns and programs that were inherited from maternal lineages, from, from our society, from the collective, from possibly past lives, et cetera, et cetera, that I knew that I was caught in, that wasn't, in light truth to my beingness, but was living out in my day to day. So at the end of 2024, I told the guys, like, I'm done operating from survival. I didn't want to keep running my nervous system on high alert, always scanning, always bracing, always in this low grade hum of maybe, freeze or maybe even collapse, etc. I want to declare whatever was holding that in place, because I could just feel it. I could really feel that, whether it came from, this life or, past lives, ancestral patterns and programs, or the collective. And y'all, like, I rolled up my sleeves and I did the work. It was not easy, and it's not for the faint of heart. I cleared, I recalibrated, I showed up to the practices again and again and again, and I asked for help again and again and again from the guides. And coming into 2025, I don't know, you may remember at the end of 2024 into 25, I was sick with this deep, like, chest cold. Like, my voice was almost gone. I felt like I was drowning in this old survival energy. And during that time, two words came through that carried me. It was my power positive words for 2025: light and thriving. So those words, I Reiki them, light and thriving became my anchor words. And then with the wave of becoming, that had already been coming in, but then really vamped up in the end of April, May, etc. So with the way of becoming, and those intention words, those power positive Reiki intention words, light and thriving, with the way of becoming, they were frequency keys. They were frequency keys that opened that door in the wave of becoming. I was invited to step through it. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but once you really are aware and you see that you're in these non-beneficial patterns of survival that was inherited from lineages or the collective, etc., you can't unsee them. Once you get the consciousness on it, you can't give it back. And so my desire to unravel these non-beneficial paths and programs, to clear them, had been greater than how challenging it could be. And so and by that was, it was hard at times last year to really stay in the process of the clearing and the shifting, but my desire to be cleared and complete with it was so much greater than the challenge of what I was going through. And that's where your level of resolve and your level of tenacity and your level of gonna get through this, that comes down to you, your human, your soul, your oversoul, your collective guidance light team. No matter how many people are in your support team, whether it's loved ones, friends, practitioners, therapists, no one can walk this journey but you. No one can actually decide that you're going to have the tenacity to break and clear and complete cycles of non-beneficial patterns and programs but you. Your guides, your soul and your oversoul can be there with you and help you, but essentially it's the human, obviously with connection to the soul and the oversoul, but it's really the human in regard to, like, the I'm done with this and I'm ready for this, in terms of the proclaiming it to the universe, because you are then calling out a new frequency, but you have to essentially mean it, and no one else can mean it but you. That's like I think the trickiest part about this humaning experience at times. Everybody, yes, we're light in physical form, but in order for that light to really embody the physical form, you got to clear out you got to clear out the non-beneficial density that might be holding the space for it. So then with that, then one of the patterns that I really had to face head on, whew, a big piece I worked on was this old survival imprint from ancestors, from past lives and the collective that said, you had to give constantly to be safe and be loved. So basically, that played out in various ways for me, personal and professional life, where at times, like I just was in constant giving mode. And it really felt extractive at times. It felt like sometimes I was an energetic ATM at times. Like it was so, and I realized it years ago, but really since moving into the greater aspect of the work and some of the clearing and the shifting and the understanding of energy work, like I saw it and I couldn't unsee what I saw. And then also I just saw that I'm in this, not only this pattern, but it's like you're in this frequency that then you're in. And it feels like it's like this marionetting happening and it's like, how do I cut the strings from that marionette so I can be free to no longer being jockeyed around by these non beneficial patterns and programs that aren't truly me in regard to my light truth. And I had known this pattern for years and I had worked at it. But y'all, it was so thick and layered, cemented. And it has taken so many years and it has taken so many intense phases of clearing. But I really want to say, with all of the tools and the support of the guides, to finally share that, y'all, it is starting to release so much. I feel different. And some of these things that I felt really blocked on that I wanted to do, but I wasn't able to get to, I'm now able to do. And it's really the direct work that I've been doing. All the dowsings and Reiki sessions, the journaling. But it hasn't just been the energy work. It has been my human will, my determination to have a different experience, to feel differently, to complete the cycle and actually get free from it. And so I just look back to last year, in April, early May. So I was sick last year, which I hadn't been sick in like years. I was sick last year with that deep congestion, that chest congestion cold. I like lost my voice. It felt like I had so much phlegm in my lungs, like my lungs were floating in phlegm. And then that was in end of December, January. And then early April, May 2025, I got sick again, another chest cold. And again, my voice went quiet. And that's really when the wave of becoming even more so came in. And then my oversoul Saharial started really, showing up in sessions. And so the guides told me gently in, late April, early May, it's time to pause again. But this time in a greater way in some ways. Like to step back, to make space. And what I didn't realize was how much clearing was happening and also was about to come in, and how much capacity I'd need. Like I didn't realize how much clearing was coming and how much capacity I'd need. And that meant changes. I had to restructure my personal life and my business last year while I was going through this. It wasn't like I could say, "Okay, great. I got an alert, got a notification from the guides that I'm about to go through this process of so I need to go on retreat now from, late April to like, I don't know, maybe maybe end of September, early October." No. Life is still lifing. I have a business, I have a personal life. And so then I'm restructuring my personal, my business life and just it was, and I'm also clearing non-beneficial survival patterns and programs in ways that, yes, I said I wanted to, but when you say you want to do something and then it shows up and knocking at your door, mm, and you meet the moment, right? So with that, it was difficult. Some one-on-one relationships were being called to be completed, and some completed beautifully. Others were harder, but all of it was part of the realignment. And the end of April, and it went from the end of April to the beginning of October. That was really difficult in terms of me, in terms of the amount of depth of clearings and shiftings I was doing. I mean, there were like times I was just laid out on the couch. I couldn't keep my eyes open at times, and that would go on for like days, and then things would begin to shift again. And so, yeah, 2025, it also brought some other challenges. Like I mentioned, the fires in Los Angeles in January, the evacuation, other things. It wasn't an easy year, but the thing is, I didn't give up. I stuck with it even though I didn't know what was coming on the other side. It had to be better than what I had been living, right? But that compression waves of the wave of becoming, in April, May, June, July, August, that was intense at times. But then the compression waves of the wave of becoming started lifting. And I did come out the other side with something different in me. I felt different. And I also say, I just mentioned like about how I didn't know what it was going to be like coming out the other side, that it has to be better than this living, right? And I can say that because I felt like I was being so squeezed at times in these non-beneficial patterns of this exhausting survival cycle that I somehow was born into and inherited, and was not an inheritance that I wanted to say, yes, I experienced it and now I'm complete. Thank you very much. I have learned the wisdom of it. But the non-beneficial patterns was so it felt like it was just squeezing you at times. It was so, and as somebody who's a highly sensitive person, somebody who can feel energy, it just felt like at times like, you're caught in an old construct that is so heavily layered, and that it's not yours, but you're living in the reality of it, and it's just not a fun experience. And so for me, it's like, okay, I know with dowsing that when I do dowsing, I just feel better and I feel lighter and I feel more grounded. That that gave me just real understanding that there was this possibility. It wasn't just like hoping, I'm in faith on it. I understood that energy can shift. And with that, it allowed me then, okay, there can be something different on that other side. I already understood that knowingness of it. And so that's really what that following that knowingness is really what gave me the tenacity to continue doing it, even though I wasn't really sure about it. But now I'm in a different experience and I can say I 100% feel different. I feel better. I feel more grounded. I feel more coherent. I feel lighter. I feel less like constricted in ways, and I feel more alert than ever, awake. And also habits that I had been trying to work on for years, seem easier to change now. It's like these non-beneficial survival patterns had me locked out of being able to make some basic habit changes. And now I'm able to do it. But it didn't just happen on a whimsy. Woo! I just woke up and I was able to do it. It's been a lot of work. So, how I feel now, even though January 2026 started off, as I mentioned, with many people I care about going to the hospital, now, even in the face of emergencies and uncertainty, I feel clearer, more grounded, more in my life than I have felt in a long time. And I'm not saying everything is fixed or easy. I'm just saying I feel different. I don't know what tomorrow's going to hold. I don't know what I'm going to wake up tomorrow feeling, but I know I have the tools to reach for. And I also want to name something important here: how I feel and how I'm able to be at this time. I know I've mentioned this again and again, but it's so important to say this once more, or maybe several times. How I'm able to be at this time happened because I showed up even when I didn't want to, even when it felt impossible, even when I was confused, even when I wanted something different, yet didn't know how it was going to happen, even when it felt unbearable at times, even when it was emotional, mental, or maybe even physically painful. I showed up. I showed up to do more dowsings. I showed up to do Reiki sessions. I mean, I showed up last year to do more dowsings than I ever thought I would do. To ask questions, to investigate, to be a detective, like what's really happening here, to be willing to not have all the answers at once, to release from any fixed mindset and to shift into open, wise mindset, and to be patient in the process that it is unfolding, and that the information will come to me as I need, that I may not have all the answers at once, and that is okay. I showed up. And I will say again, releasing from that fixed mindset and shifting into the open, wise mindset is not easy as you age through in this middle age rigidity that I now understand, that I didn't have when I was younger. It's something to clear, and it's also something to release from any collective programming, because it can, wowzers, it can just completely create this mass tsunami of a storm through your experience real quick and leave you in negative mindset constraint. And in terms of your brain, your neural pathways, you just want to support your human. So, in regard to life and lifing, things will happen no matter how great you feel this one moment. Tomorrow can look different. And just because you have a practice, just because you set intentions, just because you have manifested X, Y, and Z, just because you got a reading, just because you got psychic information, just because you talked to the guides, just because you had a big download, it doesn't mean life stops happening. Being spiritual or multidimensional or living in the 5D doesn't mean nothing stressful ever occurs. We live on Earth. It means when things do happen, you have tools. You can choose how to respond, and you can go inward to find what still needs to be addressed. And I know I'm kind of circling the drain at this point, but I just think it's really important to share this because I want for you, whatever it is you want, I want you to be able to call that in. Like for me, I really wanted peace, coherence. I wanted to heal these non-beneficial patterns of survival and just really have an opportunity to heal my nervous system in greater ways. And so for you, I want whatever it is that you want. But showing up once to write intentions or doing one energy session or one meditation, that's not going to sustain and carry over. It is about regular uses of the tools. It is about learning how to use the tools for your systems of your humaning. And I'm also sharing this because life's emergencies just don't go away because you got a reading, set intentions, received a download. Literally, being human can mean things are going to happen. Some great, some amazing, some stressful, some not so great at times. And the only way to have in you how you handle the response in life is to use tools and to become a detective, an investigator in your own life and roll up your sleeves and let yourself be really in this game of life on the field. And it may take time, patience, and a ton of layered practices. So I have had multiple situations, as I mentioned, coming up on, the same day within several days, juggling my own life work. Being able to be fluid, shift, and use tools is so important. And I'm not just saying I get it right all the time, because we are here to learn, grow, and evolve. There is not anyone who gets it right all the time, because we are here to learn, grow, and evolve. As a baby, you had to learn how to crawl and walk, and you probably were wobbly when you learned to walk. You're here to learn, grow, and evolve. The greatest thing that you can do for your human is, am I willing to learn? Am I allowing myself to shift? What you did yesterday may not work today. Maybe you had a moment of feeling stressed. That's okay. But give yourself the opportunity to shift. To me, that is one of the things that is the greatest gift that you can give to your human. And in regard to being spiritual, having practices that really support you, and not just talking about it from a surface level, but really learning to integrate the tools. And being able to talk to the guides doesn't give you a pass on the human body to never have things happen to you or around you. I can't tell you how many times I'll ask the guides, like, what's going on with X, Y, and Z on me? And you'd be surprising, like some of the answers they give me. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Wouldn't have known that if I hadn't asked, you know? And in fact, I'll say, there's so many interesting things that if I hadn't sat down and asked some questions, I wouldn't have known. And so I'm going to give you an example that the guides said I can share, and that this person said I could share too. So there was a while back, since I talked about emergency situations, back in 2025, it's probably about like 4 or 5 months ago, there was a emergency dowsing that came up that a client asked me to do. And so I received permission to do it. And then I asked the person's soul and oversoul, what was going on. And the dowsing began and things were starting to clear. And then all of a sudden, the guides came in, and the person's soul and oversoul came in and said that there was a contemplation going on, that they were considering whether or not it was time to be complete with their experience on earth, whether it was a time to depart. And I was not expecting that during this dowsing because for a lot of reasons. And I was like, wait, what? And this is the part that the guides said I could share even more so. Uh, they said that this is from the guides. This person's soul is currently in sacred deliberation. They're not in resistance to life, but they're neither in full commitment to return to the density of form as it was. Their soul is evaluating whether the body can serve as clear enough vessel for the next phase of expression. This is not about life versus death. This is quality of coherence available. Y'all, you can imagine my surprise on this for a lot of reasons. First off, death dates and timelines are usually very sacred and the information isn't readily given. But then processing what this means, you know, in regard to a person's, care team, doctors, or whatever practitioners they're using, if they're utilizing other aspects, they can be doing all they can for a person. But if the oversoul soul and human relationship feels complete and is ready to be complete, then human intervention won't necessarily work. So then I'm like processing this, and I really began to understand last year in such a great way about this. I there's so much I did not understand in terms of the relationship with the human, the soul, and the oversoul and the guides that now I do. And I will say, since I was a kid, I always wanted to understand more. I had this knowingness of like, I want to understand more about the soul relationship with the human and the guides. And wow, some of those intentions definitely manifested last year, even in a greater way. But I really began to, kind of contemplate that and understand that. And so in regard to this client, I did that dowsing last year. And then the client asked me, if I could do some follow up. And I did. And also regarding the information, I did ask the guides, what can I share? And at that time, the guides suggested to not share um, to not share all the information. And then when that person did, then did shift. The person said, "I had this experience, and I want to talk to you about it." And we were able to really talk about the things that the guides had shared with that person, and then with me that actually matched up from from that from those sessions that I did. So it ended up being a real remarkable and powerful conversation in a lot of different ways. Because again, it's like I didn't share some of the information, and this person shared what the guide said, and I was able to, say, "Well, this is what they said too," and it matched. Um, so anyway, I did a few more dowsings, and sometime later, then this was the message afterwards. At this time, they are not choosing to exit. They're holding the threshold open. They are in what we would call a sacred pause, a soul at the doorway, not as a test, but as light truth measuring field. They are neither afraid to stay nor afraid to go. They're simply asking, can life now hold the light truth of who I am? And they'll decide based on the frequency of the answer. And the guides, then said, the next day to do another dowsing, which I did. And there was still no answer on like the decision. And the guides shared, be patient in the process, allow what needs to unfold. And then, and then, I don't know if it was the day after or the day, it was a couple days or something. The person did become like had shifted. They became even more awake, alert, and seemed to have shifted. And when I checked the numbers, like in the dowsing with the guides, their numbers had radically shifted and more soul embodiment was there than the previous day. And, I asked the guides what it meant. And so this is what the spirit doctor team said. This is the message from the spirit doctor team at that time last year. Every breath they take now is part of a recalibration protocol. Do not expect rapid return to function. Expect revelation of what embodiment means for them now, not who they were before. They're in between timelines still, not in danger, but in refinement. The human is awakening. The soul is watching to see if it is truly safe to land. So that was the end of the message. And then I asked the guides at one point during one of the sessions. I had gotten the information because some of what they were going through was some of the symptoms of like the wave of becoming. And with the wave of becoming last year, there were just moments of so many different people having their own versions of, like, I had a chest cold with congestion. Some people had other flus and things like that. And it's almost like this huge, all this congestion happened, and then there's a huge clearing. Some people, it was more, they needed more support in terms of help from possible doctors and things like that, depending. And so then when I did ask the guides about the wave of becoming for this person, sure enough, they were, this was later in 2025. And so many of us in the wave of becoming in the Patreon, the Inspiring You Patreon, we had already gone through the earliest sequences of phase one. And so the guides said that, they were in the wave of becoming phase one. They were positioned in phase one, the deconstruction and clearing, the collapse of false timelines, the rise of inner light truth, grief as a portal. And so part of what they were going through, they were going through a sickness. That sickness, which then required a lot of doctor care, was an outward catalyst of a deeper energetic release, a breakdown of soul unaligned timelines that were propped up by inherited function, karmic delay, and unconscious contracts of self abandonment. And the guides went on to share that, they were in this process. So it's really interesting how, for me, in my relationship with doing energy work and dowsing and just continuing like this investigation, it can bring just greater clarity. And in regard to the wave of becoming in 2026, so there are many in the Inspiring You Patreon that were a part of the, early part of it in terms of the early cohort that helped bring in the architecture. But now there is this new way, the guides call it new wave of initiates that's happening. And so you may see friends and family members that are also going through the wave of becoming and how you may have gone through it last year. And so the guides talked about how just the other day, these new wave initiates, they entered the wave of becoming after September 2024 and often in late 2025 or early 2026. And their soul path does not require them to build the scaffolding, which many of the Inspiring You Patreon members their souls were supporting that. They arrive, though, into what has already been built, and their initiation is often somatic, involuntary, and catalytic because the harmonic is fully alive, and which is, but still, though, with the way of becoming, there's not always a soft landing, even though the scaffolding is there, because you're essentially clearing and letting yourself shift. But with it, though, what they need, if you know anybody who is going through the wave of becoming and how we went through it last year, just continue to encourage uses of tools. And if you do Reiki and dowsing and you feel called to, and they feel called to wanting to have a session, I definitely recommend energy work if you can. And so with it, why there's like more people now going through it in terms of what the guys call new wave initiates, why they're needed is to anchor the wave deeper into density, to complete the harmonic saturation across planetary timelines, to serve as field bridges between those who prepared, which is many of us from the Inspiring You Patreon and others, and those who will only feel the resonance once the wave becomes their ground. And this is then to ensure embodiment of the wave reaches those who may never know its name but are destined to feel its light truth. And then this is from this is a message from the Oversoul Council. The wave must pass through all layers of the wave must pass through all layers of density. New initiates arrive to complete the saturation. They do not begin the wave, but they make it real in places where nothing else could. Many of you last year and the years before built the bridge, and now others can walk into the far shore. So that's the end of the message. So, my friends, if you went through the wave of becoming last year and you feel a bit shifted, now you may start noticing others around you. If they're going through the wave of becoming phases, what we went through in 2024, 2025, the symptoms will be similar to what we were going through last year or the previous year. And if you are called to ask permission, always respect free will, and do a dowsing or energy work if that calls to you, to support them and also just us on earth. Because you have walked it, you can anchor more light. And so that comes back to going around to then practices that can hold you when life gets real, which is the title of this. Practices that can hold you when life gets real in regard to the wave of becoming format year 2. So, long story short, in this podcast episode, all of this is what it means to live format year 2. Not that we bypass life, but that we live from a frequency that can hold us through life. The practices don't prevent the unknown. They hold you inside it. The choice I made, and maybe you're making too, is not to just survive anymore, but to live inside coherence, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And that choice, that's the architecture that holds. So with that, my friends, we are complete for now. If you have any questions or if you want to share anything, I would love to hear from you. So please leave a message, whether you are listening to this, whether you're listening or watching on YouTube, or if you're on the Inspiring You podcast, or if you're on the Inspiring You Patreon. I would love to hear from you. How are you? What are you noticing? What practices are supporting you? If you are in the Inspiring You Patreon, the Meditate With Me and the All Access, how has the Meditate With Me practices been? Which ones have been your favorites? Which ones have really supported you? There were some from last year that really just blew my mind. And then today we did one on January 6th, which that one, I mean, I went to such a level of like deep coherence that I just felt like the stillness coherence. I still don't even have the words for it. And somebody else was remarking that they also felt that real deep experience too. Like they just went deep. It's like when you go really deep in meditation, but it's more than that. It's this real stillness coherence where you just have this like vibe of calm. I can't even tell you how grateful I am for it. And then if you're in the all access, how did you feel about this recent, dowsing we did? I mean, for me, that one just really helped me again, especially with everything that has been happening just in this last like literally 4 days. And how is that for you? And I would love to hear from you. And if you douse as well, where I know many of you in the Inspiring You Patreon have now gone through the beginning how to douse. And I would love to know how you're doing with it. And, what are you finding helpful and anything else that you want to share? I would love it. So, with that, my friends, we are complete for now. Much, much love. Until soon, and stay inspired.